Mortal Shell is an absolutely beautiful love letter to the Souls series. It is pretty much as Souls-like as a game can get. The small developer, called Symmetry, did add some flares of their own and tweaked a few settings to be a bit different, but was it enough? You wake up, no information who or what you are, walk around in some shallow watery ruins type area, and you're taught the basic mechanics of the game. We have our first new mechanic. You can press a button, L2 for me since I was playing on a PS4 controller, and you will harden. Yes, now that we have our minds out of the gutter, let's see what it actually means. When you hold the button, you will essentially turn to stone. This will last until someone hits you or until it turns off on its own after a few seconds. During this time, you are invulnerable. No status effect, no range attack, not a thing that can hurt you. Except falling for some reason. The cool part is that you can activate it absolutely whenever you want. By that, I especially mean that you can activate it in the middle of an animation. Much like any man can tell you, learning to control your harden will make your life significantly easier. I will elaborate on this a little later. When you're first hit, you're taught that all the items in the game are new to you. So when you obtain them, you don't know what they do until you use them. This mechanic seems interesting at first, until you get items that seem more important to you and either hold off on using them in the fear of wasting them, or you actually just waste them. It's a honestly completely redundant system, and I grew to be more annoyed by it more than anything. After that, there's the combat. Target locking, dodge, roll, light attack, heavy attack. The combat works rather well for the most part. There is the occasional broken hit reg and confusing timing of iframes, but it really does feel like a love letter to the Souls games. So much so that the camera and the lock-on mechanic will screw you over every so often, just like in Dark Souls. The tutorial ends with your first sort of boss fight with the so cleverly named Hadern. Regardless on if you win or not, you get eaten by a large worm and sent off into the game itself. Don't worry, this is not the last time you run into Hadern. Soon after you wake up in Fulgrim, which is the game's main area, you find your first shell. Now here's the basic idea of how you can choose to play. There are 4 characters that you can choose to play as, and 4 weapons to choose from. All the other shells are found in Fulgrim, and all the weapons are obtained from the other 3 areas by finding a book and beating our good friend Hadern. Every time. Each shell has differing amounts of HP, stamina, and resolve, and have different perks that the shell can have. A few perks are universal, but most differ. You obtain these by using glimpses as well as tar, the game's version of Souls. I didn't find myself caring about any of the skills beside the one that allowed me to get back into my shell if I killed enough enemies. See, dying in Mortal Shell isn't fatal the first time. The first time someone kills you, instead of dying, you are thrown out of your warframe shell and left naked and afraid. Out of the shell, you are pretty much one hit away from dying for real. So you really want to get back into your shell. Once you do, your shell is revitalized back to full HP, but the spare life is now spent. This is a good mechanic and can save you from a BS death. It does make the game easier though, but I wouldn't say that as a bad thing. The skill I mentioned before allows you to get that spare life back if you kill enough enemies instead of having to go back to a sister with an E. Besides this one skill, I really only looked at the stamina and HP pools of each character. They are TL, the guy with lots of stamina, little HP, the least resolve, and a borderline teleportation dodge. Harris, the one you start with medium stamina, resolve, and HP, with a basic dodge and roll. This is your run-of-the-mill character. Solomon, the one with a bit more HP, mid stamina, and lots of resolve. And Eridrim, the thick boy, with little stamina, little resolve, but a ton of HP. Unsurprisingly, the thick boy can't dodge, he can only do a little roll. I chose to go with TL for the most part, because I've always been more about the less HP, more quick type gameplay. In terms of weapons, there's the big sword you start with, an even bigger sword, a big stick, and then your fast option in the form of a chisel and pick. I was pretty bummed out since I don't like big sword gameplay, so my options were rather limited. It is what it is. The weapons themselves also have their own upgrades. Each weapon has 5 ways to upgrade it. One item will give any weapon just flat out damage, and this can be done up to +5. 2 other items will improve your parries, and then each weapon has their own 2 items that unlock said weapon's special abilities. Usually a powerful attack, and then a powered up version of said attack. These attacks use that thing I said earlier, resolve. It's its own meter that fills up from killing enemies. That's about it. After you're done exploring the hub area, you hopefully went and talked to this chained guy up top, who tells you what you need to do. There are 3 places around Fulgrim. Go to each and bring a thingy called a gland back to him. Sure, big chained monster guy with one of the best voices in a game ever, I'll do that. This won't end badly.
It's been so long since you seem different. Unfortunately, I have little to offer you, save for that tarnished seal in your hands. A small gift, but I expect you will find it useful.
That's about all of the exposition you'll get. Here is my first gripe with the game. In the Souls games, the story is pretty hidden, and you generally don't have directions on where to go. But the map is made in quite a linear way, so you can always tell when you've gone toward a new area. Believe it or not, Mortal Shell's story is even more hidden. As in, you're told very, very, very little. And Fulgrim itself is so similar for quite a while in every direction that it's extremely easy to get lost. And throw in the little crawl spaces that sometimes get you to an area you were supposed to be going, sometimes get you to a different path toward a different area that you might have already been in, and sometimes leads to a dead end. It is a pain to navigate. Now look, in terms of the areas and the map design, I cannot understate how much I like the dark atmosphere and the graphics of the game. But the inconsistencies in the level design were so severe that I absolutely loved some areas and couldn't stand being in some. Now this is not like Soul series Blighttown, nobody likes it because it's dark and it's hard to navigate. This is just pure objective quality of the design in an area. You see, one of the 3 areas is this catacomb that changes toward an icy dungeon the further you go. It's linear, it's clear, you don't get lost, the enemies are well designed, and their placement is top notch. I loved it. Going to this huge stony hall after that felt like I stepped into the alpha version of the game. The area starts with a grand hall type of hall out of something like a castle, and you fight the first enemy, who is this big, intimidating paladin looking guy with a giant mace. After that, you enter this enormous stony hall with these hexagonal stones and ruins all about it. At first, I was intrigued, but that was until I actually ventured forth in this hall. What the area ended up being was just lots and lots of empty gray stone areas with just nothing. An enemy here, and an enemy there, but mostly just boring, just walking. Add to this the short render distances of enemies, which also is incredibly inconsistent. This sometimes results in them appearing from thin air right in front of you. These two combined made it feel like most of the time you're just running about in a completely empty plateau of stone. Well, after navigating this expanse of nothingness, I finally came upon the first boss. I was excited, and actually a little bit scared. It almost felt like I was back to playing a Souls game again. Sadly, I soon learned that the bosses, of which there are 5, if you don't count copy-paste Hadern, are all rather simple. With an extremely limited amount of movesets, it didn't take long to learn them, and learn to use the dodge and harden mechanics to make short work out of the bosses. Of these 5 bosses, there were 2 that I didn't one-shot. Those coincidentally being the first one and the last one. That was a major disappointment. Not to mention that 3 of the 5 bosses were just some kinds of knights, and the first one was a big boy version of a mini boss from the first area. For anyone more experienced in the Souls games, for anyone who's played the Souls games, learning the mechanics and learning the bosses of Mortal Shell will be really easy and really fast. With this lovely segue, we will lead into another gripe that I had. After defeating the first boss, you obtain one of these glands you were told to get. Once you obtain it, the game area changes. Somebody forgot to pay the electricity bill and it suddenly becomes dark. With 2 of the 3 areas, most enemies are now changed to these jumpy melee boys that look a little like you when you're out of your shell, just more ripped. As well as these hooded ghost boys that are reskinned versions of another hooded ghost boy in one of the areas. Well, both of these enemies are incredibly easy. If you don't count the ghosty boy's occasional BS instacast AoE attack that will one-shot you. But here we see the game attempt the always great idea of if there's more of them and they're harder to see, it's now harder, right? Don't get me wrong. I was excited the first time it happened because I thought, ooh, new enemies? But no new enemies. No new mechanics. Just a bunch of speedy boys running around with the lights off. After doing the slog back the first time, I couldn't even be bothered with them on the other 2 clans. I simply ran through the areas back to the hub. It's a mechanic that had a lot of potential but was just left unfinished or unrealized. Now, I'm aware this might be, and most likely is, due to simply the production costs and the production amount and the company being smaller, but this is something that the player will be left with. On that note, I realize I've had a lot of criticism of the game, so I must absolutely hate it then. Actually, no. I think the game was great. Keep in mind, the game is made by a small studio, and it only costs $25 on Steam. All of the criticism that I have stems from love toward the Soul series. And as a love letter to the Soul series, I'm comparing the game straight to it. And in that way, I can definitely say that the game, with its 10-ish hour runtime, is not as good as those games. But as a love letter, and considering the size of the studio, and considering the price, I thought it was a great time. And it got me wanting to go back and replay the games that it was tributing, again. Mortal Shell is definitely not a perfect game. But I thought it was pretty great for exactly what it was. Thanks for watching. If you found this video entertaining or helpful, make sure you like the video. If you're interested in seeing or hearing more of my stuff, consider a subscription to the channel. I'm LowFigh, and I will see you all next time.